Hey, do you hear that, Mike?
What's that?
That's the adult music theme in stereo for the first time.
In stereo. We've joined the 20th century, and it's the 21st century. I don't know what's happening. We're almost here. We're almost up to date.
We'll get there.
Yeah. Let's go to the 1970s and get it in quadraphonic sound. That'd be awesome. Just like my old Pink Floyd albums.
Anyway, I've decided to move things up to stereo for a few reasons. When we started out, we were not including audio samples yet, so it was just our voices that people heard. And in some production recommendations for podcasts, they recommend mono, just in case someone happens to be listening with one earphone, while they're at work and need their other ear free for something. But we've gone on to include audio samples, and looking back at the past few episodes, we had a cello recording that had two cellists that were actually switching channels depending on the track.
Yeah.
And then a few weeks back, we had cornetist Kirk Knufke's recording that had two bassists.
Right, and they're both in different channels.
Right.
And that was part of the pleasure of the recording.
It really was. And so I thought, well, we're missing out on that experience a bit in the samples. And so that would be a little bit more enjoyable and realistic if we bump things up to stereo. So I thought it's the time to do that. And I'm also going to increase the bit rate for a little better audio quality from now on as well.
Yeah, so you might want to download the podcast before listening to it so that you don't get any glitches, but it might be okay. As long as your Wi-Fi is fast, it'll be fine.
Yeah, it should be an improvement overall. If you have any opinions on that, be sure to let us know. You're listening to the Adult Music Podcast, the podcast with music for the mature mind. I'm your co-host, Russ.
And I'm your co-host, Mike.
Bringing you 6 recordings every week centered around classical and jazz music. And before we get into this week's particulars, I want to send out a special thanks to John Bishop, founder and head of Origin Records. Now, Origin has been supportive of what we're doing on adult music, and this week, John Bishop included adult music review summaries on the Origin homepage for some of the recordings that we've featured in our episodes. They really have one of the best homepages of any record label, with artist profiles, detailed recording credits for each release, and a searchable review database, so it's a real pleasure to be included there. Another thing is their album design. John Bishop designs all of their album covers, which really have a distinctive and attractive look. You can pick out the covers as the Origin style right away. But of course, the most important thing is the music, and their releases have been among our favorite jazz recordings. In fact, we'll start the jazz section tonight with a new Origin release, and certainly have many more to come. Especially, we're looking forward to Jason Kaiser's Kind of Kenny release coming up on the OA2 label at Origin. So, something to be excited about.
Yeah, really great.
Tonight, before we get into the music, remember, as always, that in the episode description, you'll find links to Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music for all the music that we'll discuss. And at the top of the description, there's a link to the full episode playlist. That's all the music in one place on Deezer, CD quality streaming music from France. You can listen to the podcast on Deezer as well if you want to get everything in one place. And wherever you listen to us, if the full description or the recording links are not easy to read or follow, you can always come over to our host site, Podbean, podbean.com, where everything is easy to follow. If you enjoy the podcast, please follow or subscribe wherever you like to listen to us, and tell a music-loving friend. And if you take a moment to give us a ranking or write a short review, that also helps us get listed in the music category recommendations, and that's another way that we can get new listeners. Also, come follow us on our Facebook page to get extra info and more new releases throughout the week. You can leave a message or comment there as well, see our interaction with the artists, and if you'd like to contact us directly with any comments or questions, we'd love to hear from you. Our email address is adultmusicpodcast, all one word, @gmail.com. As I mentioned, we will be playing audio samples in stereo this time.
Woo, yeah.
And here is our fair use disclaimer. Music sample clips are for commentary and educational purposes. We recommend that listeners listen to the complete recordings, all of which are available on streaming services in the links provided. And we also suggest that if you enjoy the music, you consider purchasing the CDs or high-quality downloads to support the artists. And I got to tell you, Mike, I'm really excited about the classical half this week because I really enjoyed all 3 albums a lot.
I did too. Yeah, this really worked out well.
Yeah.
I was pretty happy myself about this. Let's go for the first one, the Baroque era. This one is music by Marais, Tombeau pour Monsieur de Sainte-Colombe. Okay, so for those of you who are as old as us, You might remember a film from the 1980s, a French movie called Tout le matin du monde with Gérard Depardieu. It was originally a novel that was made into a movie, and it was really famous and really put Marais' music on the map. Jordi Savall recorded all the viol tracks on that album, and it became like this huge hit album for classical music in the 80s. And we've been listening to Marais' music and Sainte-Colombe's a little bit ever since. Now, we don't know much about Sainte-Colombe. We don't even know his name. He's referred to as Monsieur de Sainte-Colombe, and we don't even know when he was born and when he died. But he was a very solitary figure, and Marais took a few lessons from him. But he had a very different approach to music than the schools, let's say, of the day. I'll get into that a little bit. Anyway, this is an album by an ensemble that I have a few albums by, but we've never talked about them on the podcast, surprisingly enough. This is by La Rêveuse, and they are Florence Bolton, bass viol and director, Emily Audouin, bass viol, Karsten Loaf, harpsichord, and Benjamin Perrot on the theorbo, baroque guitar, and he's another director of the ensemble. This is on the Harmonia Mundi label, and it came out August 30th, so it's fairly recent still. All right, what is this? This is a selection of works from Marais' second book of viol pieces published in 1701. In the first book, Marais had imposed a new style of viol music and relegated the solo viol music of his predecessors to the olden days. Don't you hate that? You're writing music, you're having your career, and then some guy comes along and changes everything, and now your music is irrelevant. Oh well. The second book went further. It had 142 pieces.
Wow.
The first one had 93, so I guess he composed these over a long period of time. They're pretty short. He abandoned the simple keys of D and G to venture into the sinuous twists and turns of tonality. This is according to the Harmonia Mundi booklet note, where the viol reveals itself to be full of surprises and mysteries. And we have a few of those surprises on this album. Marais also introduced the first pièces de caractère, or character pieces, into the middle of dance suites, and we'll hear some of those in the final tracks of the suites and in the last tracks, Couplet de Folie and Les Voix Humaines, but we'll talk about those when we get to them. All right, let's get on with the music. I'm really looking forward to hearing this new stereo on adult music. Tracks 1 through 5, Suite for viol and basso continuo in E minor. First movement is a prelude, and it has a gorgeous overall sound opening the piece. This is going to be the best way possible to start our stereo samples, with the theorbo starting with an upward arpeggio and the bowed bass viol following. The viol eventually plays its own melody over the accompaniment. Let's hear that begin. Okay, now you're hearing two bass viols there, one of them in the lead and the other one is assisting with the continuo. The tone is expressive and sometimes breaks into a dancing rhythmic pattern. You might think it sounds very introductory, and of course it is. It's a prelude. There's beautiful thick tone throughout the track. The booklet says both violas feature on the track. I'm guessing it's Florence Bolton in the lead, being that she is the director. I think the director gets the pride of place, but you never know. Anyway, I'll just guess that. If I'm wrong, they can correct me, and I'll make a correction on the podcast next week. Track 2, the Allemande, which is a dance, and this kind of sounds like a dancing piece. Let's hear the opening. We go off into a new phrase there after the cadence. The viol saws out the theme. There's a B section countering the opening harmonic material. Track 3, the third movement, Sarabande à l'Espagnol. Again, I believe Bolton has the lead while Émilie Audouin plays the bass part. The harpsichord and theorbo are also present. We're hearing the whole ensemble here. It's an appropriately slow, severe work with dips in the rhythm indicating the dance quality. I like the lightly taken ending of this movement. Yes, sarabandes were slow, really sensual dances. Check YouTube, by the way, if you want to see how it's done. They have Baroque dances on there. Track 4, the fourth movement, Gigue, a lively work with a catchy dotted triplet melody. The rhythm is taken with a light touch, and the piece sort of lightly dances along. Again, it's a deft interpretation with some subtlety to the phrasing. And track 5, the fifth movement and final movement, Tombeau pour Monsieur de Sainte-Colombe. This is the, I guess you could call it the title track. And it's a character piece. The booklet says it's a tombeau, which is tinged with deep melancholy and despondency, racked by inner pain for the death of Monsieur de Sainte-Colombe, one of Marais' teachers. The uncertain rhythm, now wavering, now borne along by a powerful inner impulse, the silences, the tremblement of the note, everything here converges to generate intense emotion. So I'm reading that from the booklet. The melancholy is apparent right away, and in the phrase in the first minute featuring a brief harmonic surprise, the tone lightens in the soloist's characteristic way. Again, I'm guessing Florence Bolton is the soloist. Let's hear this about a minute in. Yeah, a lot of spice in those sometimes very chromatic lines. Chromaticism, by the way, in classical music, especially if it's in a bass, usually indicates death or like a funeral or something like that. You might want to keep that in mind when listening to classical music. It's sort of a trope for that. As in the sarabande's ending, there's a light tone to the lead bass viol that can suddenly grow heavy and melancholy, but is very appealing to listen to. Let's hear the lightly moaning tone it produces in the fourth minute after a pause characteristic to this work. This is really interesting. Got out just before the cadence. It was taking a long time. He was really teasing us, keeping that cadence away. Anyway, good characterization of the emotions by Bolton here. Track 6, a new piece, Chacun en rondeau. So, rondeau, a rondo. It's a relatively upbeat work with brief repeating bass line that dips downward at its end. It sounds like bass violists are playing in duet here, so I'd guess Émilie Audouin has the lower voice. There's an especially pretty section where the entire bass drops out and we hear only a single bass viol accompanied by harpsichord both play in the higher range at 1 minute and 50 seconds. Let's hear that. There are also some quick passages for the lead viol and some subtle timbral changes in the combination of continuo instruments played by Karsten Loef and Benjamin Perrot. Track 7 through 10, Suite for viol and bass continuo in D minor, a 4-movement work. Track 7, the prelude, starts with the theorbo line followed by the bass viol playing a melody in its upper line. It's got a plaintive feel. Let's sample that. The theorbo has the quality of a guitar here, so much that I would have guessed it was a Baroque guitar, but we'll hear one of those soon enough. The movement is melodic on the bass viol all the way through, and Florence Bolton puts across the melody appealingly. Track 8, the second movement, Ballet en Rondeau, has a light, rollicking rhythm, slightly played down by the ensemble, giving it a sense of being on the edge of decorum. The themes in between the rondeau theme are more contemplative and song-like in their bowed legato quality. It's almost as though we have these lightly brooding moments answered by an ebullient dancing personality in the rondeau sections. We hear 2 bass viols here. They play in a kind of counterpoint in the slower sections, Emily Audouin on the second viol. Track 9, the third movement, La Polonaise, features Benjamin Perrot on the Baroque guitar for the first time on the album. To be honest, it's hardly noticeable as a guitar, as the 2 bass viols play over it, thickening the texture. When it peeks out of the texture at very brief moments, you can hear it. This movement progresses in a dancing, dotted rhythm and seems to have a sort of rondeau form as well, with the intervening sections acting as variations on that opening Polonaise theme. And track 10, the final movement, the fourth movement, Cloche ou Carillon. Now, a carillon is a set of bells that sort of chime in a pattern. One of Marais' character piece movements, and it imitates carillon bells on a bass viol, if you can imagine. You won't have to imagine soon. Let's listen to it. So it's really the patterns repeating that really give away the carillon quality of the piece. This features all 4 instrumentalists. You heard them all there. Benjamin Perrot on theorbo at its most resonant. We hear some of the athleticism and the bass viols are capable of in the higher end. Nowhere near as agile as a cello, but the tone in the high end has enough suppleness to permit some fast lines. This movement stands out from the rest, sounding non-traditional in its more athletic playing. Track 11, we get to a composition by Monsieur de Sainte-Colombe. That's all we know about his name. It's his concert, this is 44, Tombeau les Regrets, or Regrets. It has multiple short sections in it. They all have names. Les Regrets Carillon, which is going to be the carillon bells again. Appel de Charon. Actually, I'll talk about these as we get to them. The only Sainte-Colombe piece on the album, and this composition, as with all of Sainte-Colombe's compositions, is for 2 viols. It was Marais and his contemporaries at court that introduced the 1 viol pieces. This features various sections that illustrate their titles. It starts with Les Regrets, featuring a mournful set of lines, stretched out with a moaning quality. At 1 minute and 21 seconds, we hear Sainte-Colombe's version of a carillon. It sounds a bit low-key, as this piece seems to be about death, and we're regretting the death of someone here. At 2 minutes and 14 seconds, we hear Appel de Charon, who's the ferryman of the Styx River, so he's going to ferry the dead into Hades, the land of the dead. At 2 minutes and 37 seconds, another sustained mournful section called Le Pleurs, or the Tears. And at 4 minutes and 48 seconds, a more upbeat melody comes in for Joie des Élysées, which is where I guess all the heroes of France go after they die, the Elysian Fields. It's got an appealing lilt to it, and that's the part I want to sample. It's really the only cheerful part of the piece. So this isn't really characteristic, but let's hear a bit of it. So, a rather sad piece with a happy ending. Track 12, Marais, Fantaisie in A major. This has a cheerful opening started by a single bass viol, played by Florence Bolton. It then goes into new sections that act sort of like variations on the opening mood, hence the title Fantaisie. Let's sample this from about the minute and 45-second mark when it's really getting into its variations on the theme. The Fantaisie sections remain upbeat, and the ensemble managed some appealing detail, as in the sample. Track 13, another new composer for the album, Robert de Vizet, Chaconne in G major. Now, a chaconne is a repeating bass pattern that gets sort of this kaleidoscopic sort of set of improvisations over it. They kind of come across as variations often. This is Benjamin Perrot playing on the theorbo. The recordings usually use the guitar or a lute for de Vizet's music. It's a complete change of pace with only the theorbo on the track. The rhythm has a loping quality to it, giving it a sense of forward movement. Let's hear that. Yeah, now in this piece, de Vizet is finishing all of his melodic patterns along with the end of the bass line. The bass lines in a chaconne are usually very short, and they just keep repeating. And you could just go over those lines with the improvisation part and just keep the melody going, but in this case, that doesn't happen. Anyway, this is a chance for director Benjamin Perrot to shine, and he gets energy and subtlety of tone out of the instrument throughout. The piece proceeds in short sections with new themes appearing over the repeating bass figure. Certain thematic elements come back often in the more improvisatory set of varied melodies. A refreshing and appealing piece, beautifully played and sounding great on the theorbo, an instrument I've really come to appreciate more this year. Track 14, Marais, Couplet de Folie, and this is from the Folie d'Espagne, which is a set of chords that a lot of composers used to improvise over. Now, this composition is pretty long, and we don't hear all of it here. The ensemble has chosen certain couplets to illustrate, and they've arranged them in this order: 1 through 5, 7, 9 to 11, 17, 21 and 22, 26, then we go back to 18 and 19, and then 29 and 30, back to 27, 31, and we end with number 28. Now, you don't know the score. This is just going to sound like a original composition to you and to me too. I don't know what the score of this is either. I always wind up wondering what the missing couplets sounded like. But this piece features two bass viols, one playing some counter-melodic bass lines while the other is in the higher range. We hear the Baroque guitar in the continuo here, played by Benjamin Perrot, probably giving a bit of that Spanish sound. Let's hear the loping variation at about the 2-minute mark, followed by a slower, more languorous variation. Very appealing, and the whole piece goes like that. The variations are rather short and follow each other rather quickly. I was struck by the bass-heavy, hard-bowed, lugubrious variation, or couplet, at the beginning of the 4th minute. The rather spare variation at 6 minutes features muted guitar accompaniment, and that was attractive as well, and I think I'd like to sample that one. So let's go ahead and hear a bit of that. There's quite a bit of variety in this set. I imagine the couplets that aren't programmed are pretty interesting too. This arrangement of the couplets works well. And the final track, track 15, Marais, Les Voix Humaines. This is a character piece, and it's a rondeau played entirely in double and triple stops. The piece moves very slowly, and we get to luxuriate in the tone of the bass viol with the theorbo gently accompanying, acting as continuo. The melody itself is attractive. At 1 minute and 4 seconds, a light variation on the opening melody begins, and the theorbo's tone lightens up as well. I'd like to sample this part because there's some really beautiful sonorities from both instruments here. And I should mention before we listen to this is a duet between the two directors of La Rêveuse, Florence Bolton on the bass viol and Benjamin Perrot on theorbo. It's sensitively played and an ideal ending to an enjoyable album. Let's hear this from about 1 minute in. Yeah, really beautiful ending to this album. So La Rêveuse is an ensemble, as I said, I've been aware of since 2018, but we haven't talked about them on the podcast yet, and I'm glad we finally are. They're a small ensemble, but produce a big sound for their size, and they're ideal in Marais' music, and music for bass viol in particular. It's good to hear this music with accompaniment. Early recordings were often for the solo viol, and La Rêveuse performed these works with exquisite taste and a surprisingly wide palette of timbres and touches. The music itself ranges from lively to soothing and is an ideal morning listen, especially in performances as fine as these. I especially like the last track, Le Voix Humaine, which you just heard a sample of, featuring the two directors, Florence Bolton and Benjamin Perrot. You can tell they've been playing together for a while as they anticipate each other's approaches to the point where the sound comes across as more than the sum of its parts. This is a highly recommended album.
Two viols are better than one for sure.
Yeah.
The tones of these instruments are lovely. I enjoyed the performances. Overall, the tempos are on the slow side, with performances that are relaxed, even on the more rhythmic material. It was interesting how the suites started out with slow lyrical preludes, and I was surprised by the harmony in some places, particularly in track 6, the number 82 from the suite in G major. There's some ideas that seem ahead of the time period, and I enjoyed the theorbo playing on the recording as well. Just a gorgeous sounding recording that surrounds you with deep tones.
It's really funny you say that those are ahead of their time, but they're actually like still unrefined, I guess, according to the period. Because as harmony went on, it became more and more refined. And then we broke out of that. And now we have all these really cool sounds in the 20th and now 21st century. But yeah, I love hearing those.
I guess it's just a context thing. You're not prepared for them when they come along, and so they really stand out.
Right. Anyway, that's just a guess on my part. I'm just going by feel and what I've kind of remember from music history and my listening to. Anyway, we move on to the Romantic era, or really the early, this is actually not the Romantic era, the Modernist and post-war era too a bit. This is the 20th century. The composer is a Hungarian composer, Eugen Zádor, and this is his piano quintet, version for piano and string orchestra. We hear his accordion concerto. That'll be interesting. Suite for brass instruments, and Hungarian fantasy. This album features Klaudiusz Baran on accordion, Anna Gorica on piano, the Budapest Symphony Orchestra MAV, and conducted by Mariusz Smolij. And this is on the Naxos label, released August 23rd. All right, Eugen Zádor, Hungarian composer. He was also Jewish, and this is going to be important for his history. There's ample information in the booklet on the works themselves, but not much on Zádor's life. He was born into a Jewish family in Batazsek, Hungary. I hope I came close to saying that right. In 1894. And if you do a little math, you can figure out how he wound up in the United States in 1939. He studied at the Vienna Music Academy and in Leipzig with Max Reger. Very impressive. And he taught from 1921 at the New Vienna Conservatory and later at the Budapest Academy of Music. He left Austria on the day of the Anschluss to return to Hungary and actively sought employment in the U.S. out of fear of the rise of Nazi Germany, and was able to successfully earn a post on the faculty of the New York College of Music. The college obtained an American visa for him, good for them, and he sailed to the U.S. in 1939. Once there, he found, in addition to teaching in New York, a post in the music department of Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer, and composed music anonymously for a number of film scores, but regarded his movie work as supportive of his own creative activity. He preferred to work at home on the orchestration of other composers' music, and that's how he wound up orchestrating so many of Milos Rocha's film scores. Milos Rocha, one of those big names in Hollywood composition, along with people like Erich Wolfgang Korngold back in the 1930s and 40s. He died in Hollywood in 1977. This is Zádor. Naxos has released a number of albums featuring his music, which I was unaware of until now. According to my counting, this is the 8th release. Wow. So if you like this album, there's 7 more you can go back and listen to. On this particular release, it was the accordion concerto that caught my attention. Oh, wow, what's an accordion concerto from the 20th century going to sound like? This is how I listen to music, folks. I just look for these odd sort of combinations of instruments, and I say, gee, I wonder what that'll sound like, and that'll just start me on this new course, especially in this age of digital technology where you can just stream everything. I decided to investigate this composer's music, and I have to say, I was not sorry I did. Yeah. Tracks 1 through 3, Accordion Concerto. This was written in 1972. I was alive then. How about that? Klaudiusz Baran on the accordion. The Accordion Concerto is one of a series of concertante works Zádor composed for what he called underprivileged instruments. We should bring that term back, shouldn't we? And he includes in that trombone, cymbalom, and double bass. Okay, these are underprivileged in classical music, okay? And the cymbalom is probably
everywhere.
Privileged in jazz and everywhere else as well. Anyway, it was written for American accordionist Anthony Gallarini, who had made his debut on the vaudeville circuit at the age of 4 in 1908 and continued to play for nearly a century until his death in 2006.
Wow.
Wow. The concerto is consistently tonal, but colored by a distinctive wash of 20th century musical vocabulary, and that's what makes it interesting. The first movement, Allegro Moderato, this is track 1 on the album, and this starts with C major sunshine. The structure of the work is ABA, so very easy to follow. The accordion wastes no time coming into this cheerful opening. Let's hear a sample of the opening of this piece. Okay, so this piece was written in 1972, and Zádor is living in the United States at this time. And to me, this recalls a mid-century American work, something like Copland or maybe Dvorak's American.
I was thinking that too, yeah.
Yeah, and also there are these little like blues note sort of endings to a lot of these phrases. So it's sort of pentatonic that way. The music is just so angst-free. It's really uplifting. There's something folksy and rustic about the themes and orchestration, and we even get a sprinkling of xylophone in there, another instrument that's sort of gone by the way here in the 21st century. You'll usually go for a marimba now. It's really fallen off the orchestral map, and I think that's a little sad. It is kind of, when I hear a xylophone, I think, oh, the 20th century. It just has that sound to it. There's sort of a cheerful march in the middle B section, and the A section returns in the 3rd minute. There's a lightly taken and rousing ending. All right, now track 2 is the second movement, marked moderato, and the notes say that heavy clouds move in here. Well, I don't know about that. Chromaticism is mixed in with an expansive C minor idea, and midway through, a new path leads to a march-like section. This movement is a bit longer than the brief first movement. The accordion plays a theme that we associate more with it, something with a bit of sadness to it, if you've spent any time in Paris or other places where people play the accordion. You hear this sort of sound very often on the subway or, on the streets often too. It's interesting to hear some of the spicier chords in the accordion too, but the tone of the accordion softens their impact in an appealing way. They don't really come across as, harsh or anything like that. Listen to this odd theme in the accordion in this sample. This is from around the 1 minute and 50 second mark. Now let's get out there, since there's a long pause. The orchestra has a pretty theme after the 2 minute and 30 second mark. I didn't let the sample go long enough for us to hear that. And this leads to the previously mentioned march-like theme, which begins around the 3 minute and 20 second mark. The accordion tone has that light teardrop quality we often hear from it, which makes it so appealing and keeps this quality to the end of the movement. Track 3, the third and final movement of the accordion concerto, Rondo alla Zingaresca, so a zingarello in Italian is a gypsy. This is in rondo form, and there are Hungarian snaps, this is in quotation marks, in the rhythmic profile, according to the booklet. The theme is light and playful, so let's hear the introductory percussion rumbles and the playful rondo theme. Fun. Around the 2-minute and 40-second mark, the music clouds up a bit, sounding slightly more ominous and minor. We hear a bit more of the xylophone when the theme returns, and some virtuosity from the accordion in the section from the 3-minute and 55-second mark. The movement ends with a rousing cadence, rather modestly played by the orchestra. On track 4, we have a piece called Romance. This is the version for cello and string orchestra, and this features Richard Rocha on the cello. This is arranged by the conductor, Mariusz Smolij. This is originally for cello and piano, and you can kind of tell by listening to it. The melody is free-flowing and rhapsodic. The work is through-composed, although the opening phrase returns in the middle and the end of the piece. The accompaniment in the strings has a leaves in the wind quality as the cello sings its theme. Let's hear that and see if we can catch that. It's really a beautiful melody, but I feel like the string orchestra really changes the quality that the piano would bring. But that's okay. It sounds really nice this way. It's a straightforward and very appealing work. The orchestra maintains its mysterious, suggestive quality throughout, and there's some wonderfully warm moments from the cello, particularly the phrase ending at the 3-minute mark. Tracks 5 through 7, Suite for Brass Instruments from 1961. This features 4 horns, 4 trumpets, 3 trombones, and a tuba. Track 5, the first movement, Allegro moderato moving to Vivo. The opening fanfare-like figures with their dotted rhythms and 4th and 5th intervals recalls the world of Miklos Roja's score for Ben-Hur, which you might remember, the Charlton Heston movie, which Zádor had orchestrated 2 years earlier. Zádor's day job from the early 40s to the mid-60s was the exclusive orchestrator of Rocha's film scores during that period. The music grows more martial as the trumpet carries the melody. So let's hear the opening. Do you remember Ben-Hur? Let's see if you can identify the quality. It's not the same melody, but the quality of that film score here. Oh, yeah.
Bring in the chariots.
Exactly. At 1 minute and 42 seconds, the marching theme comes in. A solo trumpet plays for the large majority of this, though the rest of the ensemble get chances up front. At 3 minutes, we hear a gentle theme with a dotted rhythm played piano and contrasting with what we've previously heard. The more fanfare-like profile returns at 3 minutes and 41 seconds and brings us to the end of the movement, which ends with a bright forte and slightly spicy chord. Track 6, the middle movement, Andante. This is in ABA form, so it's got a middle section and the first section repeats. In the B section, solo trumpet takes the lead. A hesitant chord theme opens the movement, and soon trombones and horns set a bed for the trumpet to play a theme over, and I'm going to sample that. This is about from the 1 minute mark. Yeah, by now we've got that motif in our ear. And there's some spicy intervals in those thematic lines. Those fourth and fifth leaps are really appealing and full of character. The movement ends with a decrescendo to pianissimo. Track 7, the third and final movement, Allegro, moving to molto vivo. The triplet figures open the movement, which is based almost entirely on a rising motif introduced by trombones and tuba. The triplets outline a fanfare-type theme. At the 40-second mark, we hear yet another highly appealing theme, which gets handed around the ensemble. Let's hear that theme. Nice. I love the tuba. Yeah. I just love those low-end instruments so much, that sound they make. The tuba only gets lightly played looks in. We heard a bit of one at the very end of that sample. But it sounds fantastic when it's heard. The end of the brief movement features some characterful slides on the brass, leading to a bright final chord. Track 8, Berceuse, which is a lullaby. This is a version for violin and string orchestra arranged by the conductor. This features David Pinter on the violin, and the Berceuse started out as a lullaby set to lyrics by Henry Reese, an actor, singer, and writer, and Los Angeles-based arts administrator. The song was arranged for violin and piano with some embellishments by the violinist François d'Albert, and it was further arranged for this recording by the conductor. The piece has the traditional rocking motion over which the violin comes in its lowest range and rises higher. It's very traditional and gentle with a highly appealing melody. Let's hear it. I don't know. A lot of these Eastern European conductors who moved to the United States in the 20th century really did pick up, or maybe brought over, who knows, the blue quality that American music had. You hear a bit of that in that lullaby, too. They either picked it up or it just happens to coincide with East European scales as well. I don't really know. But when the theme repeats, it's in the highest range of the violin and sounds very sweet there at the very end. The track comes to a peaceful end. Track 9, Hungarian Fantasy, version for violin and string orchestra, and David Pinter is also the violinist on this track. This is originally for violin and piano, and it's in 3 broad sections, each developing a different Hungarian-flavored tune that, while original, has many characteristics of native folk song. The second theme starts at 3 minutes and 49 seconds if you're listening on streaming, and the final section at 6 minutes and 3 seconds, where there's also a cadenza. The work starts calmly with a bit of Hungarian spice to the melody. It's not far from Dvorak's modes in his American works, really. The violin line is rhapsodic here. At 3 minutes and 50 seconds, there's a pause, and then the second section begins with a new theme. This theme is repeated with double stops. It has the character of Hungarian gypsy music of the era, but it doesn't go completely into that character, staying light and melodic without digging in. There's no pause as the quicker, cheerful third theme begins at 6 minutes and 3 seconds. This third section makes up a full half of the piece itself. The cadenza starts at 9 minutes and 45 seconds and has the violin in double stops for most of its brief length. It ends on harmonics. The third theme then returns, and I think I'm going to sample this at the point where the third theme returns after the cadenza. This is at about the 10-minute and 50-second mark, although you can hear this earlier in the score too. Really fantastic work. I really like this. This leads to the end, and this is a piece I'd really like to hear performed in its original violin and piano form. I'm wondering if there is more fire and passion there. The string orchestra here seems to beautify the work at the expense of passion, and I feel like this should have a more momentum by the end than it does in this work, though it all sounds beautifully shaped and articulated. Tracks 10 to 13, this is the last work on the recording, the multi-movement piano quintet from 1933. This is a version for piano and string orchestra arranged by Mariusz Smolij, the conductor. This features Anna Goreka on the piano. This work predates Zádor's move to the United States by 6 years and won the composer a Hungarian National State Prize. It's a traditional formal work in 4 movements. Now, this is the only work on the album that was composed before Zádor moved to the United States. And it's kind of surprising. I'll explain why in a moment. Track 10, the first movement, Allegro con spirito. The opening 2 themes, the second one starts at 1 minute and 20 seconds, suggests sonata form, but there's no clear-cut recapitulation of the 2 themes, just a brief coda based on the first theme. Again, though, there's something Copland-esque about the opening of this movement, which is surprising, since it's a work composed in Hungary, and you would think that Zádor's sort of ears would be out for the Hungarian sounds around him as well as the formal German school that he studied in. This work speaks of happiness in wide open spaces. Listen to the opening. The accompaniment is a repeated chord played with a dotted rhythm, which holds for quite a while. The second theme, at 1 minute and 20 seconds, is warm and generous. Let's hear a little bit of that, too. At 2 minutes and 51 seconds, the opening theme is heard again. The pacing here by the orchestra is leisurely. This movement sounds like it has all the time in the world to unfold. In the 4th minute, we hear the second theme again, reorchestrated a bit. We arrive at a bigger boned version of the dotted rhythm, played in thick chords on the piano, and from here the opening theme is rhapsodized upon a bit, though we're close to the end of the movement. The piano plays the theme with thick chords, and the dotted rhythm brings us to the end. Track 11, the second movement, Tempo moderato. This has a thick texture. The arrangement provides a thick though quiet string texture. The piano plays repeated chords in a dotted rhythm again, and the strings really have the theme here, which again has the ring of an American theme to it. I guess the modal scales used are similar, and that's why that happens, but I've never heard, say, Bartók sound like this. There's something early 20th century bluesy about the phrase endings. Let's hear a bit of this. I mean, those phrase endings just talk to me about the American prairie. I don't know, but this is a Hungarian work. Anyway, the dotted rhythm lasts throughout the movement in the piano, as do the bluesy phrase endings. Track 12, the third movement, is marked Vivace. This is a classically inspired scherzo and trio. The piano has the theme here. It's got a modal quality and chiming bell tone, and glides over the twinkling arpeggiated string line. The piano line has a continuous quality to it until it breaks out briefly at the 1 minute mark. Let me just sample this from the beginning. Very pretty. So a new piano pattern is started at around the 1 minute and 20-second mark, and the strings get the melody. The piano repeats it afterwards. At 2 minutes and 34 seconds, the scherzo comes to a full stop on a tonic, and then the trio starts in a gliding triplet rhythm and with that modal harmony. It's intoxicating, so let's hear a bit of that. Zádor keeps the theme drifting, and then at the 5 minute and 10-second mark, a line leads back to the opening scherzo theme, complete with its B section. The movement ends with a satisfying pizzicato thump. And then track 13, the fourth and final movement, Allegro molto. This uses one theme that the composer subjects to multiple treatments, including a fugal passage. It clocks in at under 3 minutes, and is a pretty quick tying up of the piece as a whole. The tempo isn't pushed at all, and comes across as a leisurely allegro, with the piano attack clearly heard even in faster, more detailed lines. The fugal section begins at 1 minute and 35 seconds, and the piece becomes emphatic at the end, and there's a rush to the cadential material. But the ending teases with a pause and a surprise tonic, played mezzo forte. So, I've discovered a new composer. Eugen Zádor's music is highly appealing, with plenty of modal material. I also like the fact that he writes for unusual concert instruments like the accordion. The accordion concerto draws a lot of character out of the instrument, and Klaudiusz Baran's performance as accordion soloist is highly enjoyable and idiomatic. Really, every work on this album was appealing and graspable on a first listen. I enjoyed the orchestration in the brass quintet, and the piano quintet rather took me by surprise with its constant use of appealing modal harmony. I thought Mariusz Smolij's arrangement of the piano quintet was the most successful arrangement on the album, but of course hearing it made me want to hear the original version for smaller, more intimate forces. The string orchestra worked really well in this case. Now, I use the word spicy to describe the harmonies throughout the album, but maybe I should have said lightly seasoned. Nothing on the record comes across as harsh at all, as it can in, say, Bartók's music, though that's one of the qualities I love Bartók for. Zábor's music is highly appealing, as are these performances. Tempos are leisurely and make the themes all come across as warm and generous. I found myself wondering what leaner, more aggressive tempos would have sounded like. New elements may have come out of the score, but that's for future performances. This is a highly enjoyable listen and an excellent introduction to this composer.
It's certainly easily enjoyable 20th century music, which doesn't always happen.
You're right.
The accordion concerto was bright and fun. It's exciting with lots of percussion and interesting orchestration, and the great sonics on the recording make the percussion really ring out. It's very dynamic. The brass suite had a variety of moods, and the arranging is appealing. And as we mentioned, I felt the film scoring influence on the fanfares right from the beginning. The cello and violin works were instantly appealing too, with folk melody influences, and the piano quintet was charming. There is a mix of modern harmony, folk influences, and an American influence, like you pointed out. And I was thinking of Gershwin when I was listening to that. Yeah. And although it predates his move to the U.S., as you mentioned, but everything here is very appealing, easy to listen to, and a lot of fun.
Maybe that jazz idiom got all the way to Hungary. You just don't hear it in Bartók's music, so I just assume, they didn't have it. But who knows? He had his ear on those records probably coming over to Europe. Anyway, our contemporary composer is one of my favorites, really. Magnus Lindberg, Finnish composer, born in 1958. This is his Viola Concerto and 2 orchestra works, one called Absence and one called Serenades. Lawrence Power is the violist on the Viola Concerto, and the entire program is performed by the Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra, conducted by Nicholas Collon, on the Ondine label, and this is released on September 6th. So just last week. So I've been listening to Magnus Lindberg's music and steadily collecting releases of his music ever since coming across his clarinet concerto on a recording released by Ondine in 2005, and which I seem to recall I sent you away even way back then, Russ, on the CD.
I think so. I think I have that, yeah.
Yeah, it got some really odd tones out of the clarinet. I thought it was really exciting. That recording had Kari Kriku as the soloist, and this same Finnish Radio Symphony Orchestra conducted by Sakari Oramo back then. In fact, we discussed an album of Lindberg's orchestral works on Adult Music. That was the one that featured the works Aura, Marais, and Related Rocks, also released by Ondine and performed by the same orchestra under Hannu Lintu's baton on our 21st episode. Oh, so long ago. Sexual Healing. On July 12th, 2021.
Wow.
Boy, that was the COVID days, yeah. I guess, right? Boy, we didn't have any music samples on that particular episode, but we'll have them today for this one, and they'll be in stereo, so this is almost like a double bonus now. The booklet indicates, and I've noticed on my own, that Lindberg's music has moved from steely and edgy in his earlier years to the soft and sonorous sound worlds of his current compositions. We do mellow with age, I guess. I certainly see that I am a bit. And as an avid fan of music for adults, I'm happy about this. It suits my ear better too, at least at my age. Lindberg always had rich orchestral textures, energetic flow, and rapid shifts in his compositions. His new sound is built on a harmonic environment rooted in pentatonic scales while leveraging the overtone series. Oh, that attracts me. Lindberg is interested in a sort of anti-gravity, the booklet says, which means that the harmony is not necessarily built on the bass line. And that intrigues me because, traditionally you just think of music as starting on the bass line and being built up from there. He's building from somewhere else. We don't know from where. We just have to accept the sound that we hear. And I find that intriguing. I await each new release of Lindberg's music with some anticipation. It's wonderful to still be excited about new compositions. I'd like to recommend that the listener read the booklet notes to this if you decide to listen to the album. They clearly explain what Lindberg is after, and you don't need a music education to understand it. You can get those booklet notes at idagio.com, idagio.com. Anyway, tracks 1 through 7 are the Viola Concerto. This was composed 2023 to 2024. It's a brand new work, hot off the press, and features Lawrence Power as the viola soloist. The notes mention that the viola doesn't get much attention as a solo instrument because it falls between the dazzle of the violin and the warm sonority of the cello. Yeah, and also it doesn't project as strongly as either of those instruments for some strange reason. Anyway, Lindberg here wants to bring the two extremes together in the same instrument. Lindberg has written 2 cello concertos and 2 violin concertos. The work is written for what Lindberg refers to as a Mozart-sized orchestra, as was his first violin concerto. Lindberg says he doesn't work with a main theme and secondary theme, but rather a collection of characters with various degrees of contrast between them. They follow each other in a whirlpool-like rapid manner, often giving the music a kaleidoscopic nature, and also making it rather difficult to sample because you don't really know what to say is representative of the work. The piece comes across as having a conventional 3-movement fast, fast concerto structure, despite all the tempos, characters, moods, and tracks. I'll break it down a little bit. Track 1 is the first movement, and it's labeled just first movement. It's got a fanfare-like opening, which is very appealing. Right away, I'm just into this. The soloist is introduced as a confident hero, according to the notes, the unquestioned main character of this musical narrative. The movement is more of a dialogue between equal partners than a competition between soloist and orchestra, which is really a tradition that Beethoven started. Let's hear the viola's entry into this. This is at about the 50-second mark. There's a cool chord change at the very end of that sample. I really love that. The entry, as you heard, has a lot of double stops. There are some really cool key changes as the theme goes on, achieved on a single chord by sudden drops from the solo section, with other strings blending in to make the sound more complex. A lighter theme appears in the 4th minute, which makes the viola engage in rapid figuration. In this movement, themes will continue while the accompaniment suddenly changes, as though the carpet is being swept from beneath the soloist only to reveal another, different carpet. Lindberg makes sure we hear some of the viola's strange timbre in its lower range in the 5th minute, which is expertly brought out by Lawrence Power, who shows impressive virtuosity throughout this movement. Let's hear some of that. And just that kaleidoscopic orchestral pool underneath him is just really intriguing. The virtuosity continues to the end of the movement, which the brass announce with unresolved fanfares. Track 2, the second movement. So the second movement begins after a pause that nevertheless acts as a resolution to the chords that ended the first movement. The viola plays sweetly at the opening and also spends some time in its lower range, and in the second minute demonstrates some ear-grabbing patterns. Let's hear some of that. The viola gets brief stretches of solo material at points in the movement. There's some gorgeous chorale-like brass harmony at the 4-minute and 10-second mark that brings us a brief fanfare and a new key by the end, which ushers the solo viola back in. The movement calms down and then builds towards the next section, the trio. So this is still technically the second movement on track 3. This is fairly brief and features burbling low winds with more nasal sustained winds up top. The viola comes in echoing some of these patterns. There's appealing orchestration in this section and really throughout the work, such as in the calm section beginning at around 1 minute and 30 seconds. The calm leads directly to the next section, marked Quasi una cadenza. It's track 4. It's 40 seconds long and features a double-stopped climb by the viola. It ends in a satisfied, burbling pattern that brings us to the interlude, track 5. Still the second movement, by the way, technically. The interlude is also fairly brief at 2 minutes and 37 seconds and features some pizzicato playing from the viola, bookended by brass fanfares. The viola then goes into continuous eighth note figuration. Again, the orchestration is noteworthy here. The figuration continues and includes some sul ponticello playing toward the end. This leads directly to a cadenza, which is track 6. The soloist is invited in the score to improvise this cadenza, and I assume that's what we're hearing here. Power goes for some tonal wavering sounds and gentle strikes with the bow. Pizzicati are included. It seems that he sings too at one point. There's a distant singing at around the 45-second mark, and I'm wondering if that's Power or the conductor Collon. I assume it's Power, but how is he playing and singing at the same time? I don't really know. It's just solfege syllables, la, di, da, but it's quite a surprise to hear. The viola gets moody just before the second minute, then starts some more exploratory material afterwards. I've mentioned the odd timbre the viola gets in the low end, and that's on display at the 3-minute mark of the cadenza, so let's hear that. I suspect he might have written this out before playing it, if it is indeed by Power, this cadenza. I don't imagine you could just improvise something like this. It seems too well-shaped. Anyway, Power winds down the cadenza with double-stopped patterns. Track 7, the third movement. More energetic than the first two movements, it has rapidly repeated notes on the trumpet, breaking up the cadenza, and they introduce the third and final movement. Let's just hear the opening. Just the patterns and timbres in there, it's just so intriguing. The viola matches the figuration of the orchestra and even speeds it up, digging in and playing maniacally at one point in the first minute. In the third minute, the music slows and we hear an accelerando pattern from the viola as the orchestral space blooms and presents a tonally wide space, very satisfying. The viola quiets down here, and the orchestra presents a calm approach to the final chord, with the viola wavering in tone up in the high end, almost sounding like a theremin. And that's how the piece ends. We then get two orchestral works. Track 8 is called Absence. It was composed in 2020. And 2020 was the 250th anniversary of Beethoven's birth. Now, you might not know that because that year was ruined by the COVID pandemic, so we didn't get to see all the Beethoven concert celebrations that were planned for that year. They were all canceled. We're going to have to wait another 50 years. Anyway, Magnus Lindberg was commissioned to write Absence for the occasion by the Rotterdam Philharmonic. Beethoven is a composer that's always been important to Lindberg, according to the booklet note, because to him, Beethoven stands out as an example of what it is to be a contemporary composer. One source of inspiration to this piece was the conversation notebooks that Beethoven used in his later years to communicate with others, as he had nearly completely lost his hearing. The conversations in them ranged from everyday practicalities to elevated philosophical musings. The rapid shifts from the mundane to the sublime inspired Lindberg to seek an idiom that would highlight contrasts. And I want to point out, this is also something that our postmodern world tends to do a lot. Like if you're on Facebook, you'll get these really dopey comments followed by the occasional really profound quote that somebody decided to put up. Lindberg also quotes a number of Beethoven's motifs in this work, so the most important of them comes from Piano Sonata number 26 in E-flat major, Les Adieux, which is also about absence. In fact, the middle movement is called Absence. So the opening is close to the quote from Les Adieux' second movement. A fanfare build-up follows in the brass. The music starts rushing and gains a Hollywood quality briefly at around the 1 minute mark. We hear the Les Adieux theme again at 1 minute and 35 seconds, and there's a build-up that eventually fizzles out and brings us to a slower section with strings. The piece does proceed in contrasts, mostly from slow and quiet to louder and actively moving. Let's sample this from 4 minutes and 30 seconds where we can hear the Les Adieux quote. This would be, for all of you pianists out there, you'll recognize this from the second movement of that work. It's familiar if you know the Beethoven work, the dan, dan, dan. And you hear it throughout this work. It really structures this piece. The theme is heard clearly throughout the work. In the 6th minute, there's a strong build-up that then decrescendos and unveils new orchestral timbral combinations. The music begins moving more quickly between activity and stasis. The music pauses just after the 8-minute mark and begins a slow timbral build-up and crescendo. Maximum intensity is reached by the 10-minute mark, when we start hearing the Les Adieux theme again, and then the harmony brings the piece to a calm, serene close. Track 9 is the orchestra work Serenades from the year 2020, also the pandemic year. The Chicago Symphony Orchestra said they would like to have a serenade when they commissioned this work, and Lindberg says he began with a musical idea that deep down has a slow-moving feeling, but then takes off in many contrasting directions, with big cuts and quick shifts. Even so, the music conveys a sort of nighttime quality. Now, the piece does a crescendo from silence on strings to open, and the nighttime quality of this is more reminiscent of Bartók's haunting night music or Ravel's Night Moths or Nocturnes piano piece. The work reaches a pretty quick climax to the opening crescendo, and there are timpani and brass too. In the 2nd minute, we get a sort of motif that leads to symphonic outbursts. Let's hear that. Yeah, that rising line is what I was talking about, leading to these symphonic outbursts. This section quickly passes. In fact, it was over by the time I faded. and leads to rising figures. This is in fact a hard piece to narrate as sections change quickly. Some of the musical vistas that open are magically orchestrated. I particularly liked one I heard just after the 5-minute and 30-second mark, though those timbral delights happen often enough. The section ends at about the 10-minute mark with a full stop to the music, and a new section starts out with a new rhythm, more square and steady, and kaleidoscopic themes above. This comes to a dramatic pause after explosive timpani at around the 11-minute and 30-second mark, and the section that follows seems to bring us back to the lush, exotic orchestration of the early 20th century, with saturated strings and a harp to add dimensionality to their sound. This builds to a thick texture that has dense brass and timpani in the 13th minute. In the 14th minute, we seem to be settling on an ending harmony, but it's stretched out in a teasing way and changes its harmony, leading to some more traditional music in the 15th minute, again reminding me of the early 20th century with its lushness of orchestration. The piece finally resolves in the low winds with reedy tones, and the last chord is played by low brass very quietly. Lindberg is one of the most interesting contemporary composers. His is a name you'll want to remember in your explorations of contemporary classical music. All three of these works are highly listenable, and I found the Viola Concerto to be the most interesting, though all three works are compelling. The Viola Concerto has a tremendous amount of detail, as well as the impressive sonority of the viola and the virtuosic playing of Lawrence Power. Serenades had compelling orchestral timbral combinations that magically appear from the score, pulling the listener in, and the work Absence has clear references to Beethoven that make it seem familiar despite the novelly orchestrated moments. Lindberg has a way with the orchestra that makes his orchestral music consistently compelling, and here Nicholas Collon reveals himself to be an idiomatic interpreter of Lindberg's scores. This is an album I'll have to add to my already large collection of Lindberg's music. I guess I'm going to eagerly anticipate each new release in this composer's catalog.
I'm pretty much in alignment with your ideas here. Lindberg's a real master of orchestral timbres. The viola concerto is virtuosic, and the viola parts are exciting, but my ear is constantly drawn to the interesting orchestral parts. In the first movement, I liked how the viola also seemed to sink into the lower strings in one piece. It's like it's subsumed in there seamlessly.
Yeah.
Great brass opening, and then muted brass too. It's a really great work. Of the other two pieces, I enjoyed Absence the most. Again, rich orchestration and a huge timbral palette. And although you mentioned the references to Beethoven, I'm kind of struck by a Debussyan quality to the orchestration.
Oh, to the orchestration, yeah.
Yeah, it's very impressionistic in parts, and constant moody changes are really nice. I really enjoyed that work and the whole recording, and great sonics from Ondine on this recording.
Yeah, this is a must-have. I got to get this one.
Over to the jazz half now, and we're going to start out with some flamenco, with the Flamenco Jazz Summit. El mar empieza aquí. The sea starts here. This is on the Origin label by Belgian bassist Piet Verbist. And we've had some flamenco and flamenco-influenced recordings on the Adult Music Podcast, both in the classical and jazz categories before, Mike.
Amazing how that happens.
Looking back, two really impressive recordings are by guitarist Ignacio Lusardi Monteverde.
Oh, that's such a good album. I have to go back and listen to that again. It's been a while.
Del Canto Gitano, music of ancient Andalusia, and flamenco pasado y presente. The first on ARC Music and the second on Naxos World. Those are really great recordings to learn about flamenco music as well. That was episode 10 and episode 77, going back quite a ways. Then we had episode 64, Menage a Trio. We had on the jazz side, Vida. That was on Universal Music Spain. Josemi Carmona and Javier Colina and Bandolero. More jazz influenced. And on All Greek, to me, one of our most popular episodes, episode 69, we had Christos Tsifakis' Flamenco Odyssey. That was a pretty interesting recording. And on the jazz side, episode 80, Chambermaid, M-A-D-E, that is. We had Caminos Flamencos from bassist Renaud Garcia Fons. So we've had it in both categories before. So flamenco seems to connect to jazz in an interesting way because of its improvisatory nature, unique rhythms, and cool modes. But flamenco is more than a music, it's really a culture. So it's something you need to get inside of to really understand well. And I think I can only scratch the surface with what I know. Piet Verbiest is a bassist from Antwerp, Belgium, and studied classical double bass at the Academy of Accordion and Turnhout. He studied at the Antwerp Jazz Studio and graduated from the Brussels Conservatory in 1994, and then began lessons with bassist Dave Holland. And Verbiest engaged in a deep study of flamenco culture through a grant from the Royal Conservatory of Antwerp, making a dozen immersive trips to Andalusia to study, perform, and develop a repertoire. And he held concerts in Belgium and Malaga with his joint Spanish-Belgian ensemble, recording this album live in Antwerp at the end of 2023. And we've heard Verbiest before with Origin founder and drummer John Bishop, going back to episode 143, Elegant Wandering. That was just called Antwerp on Origin Records in a piano trio format. On this recording, we've got an interesting lineup. Piet Verbiest on bass, almost all of the compositions and arrangements. The only composition that's not his is number 4, and we'll talk about that when we get there. Carmelo Muriel on an instrument called the bansurine. I don't know how to pronounce it.
Oh, this would be the bansurine. It's a combination of two words.
Bansuri and ne, right?
Yeah.
So I think this is an instrument maybe of his own creation. It's basically a type of wooden flute that has a really earthy tone. We've got Tom Van Dyke on alto and soprano sax, Milan Verbiest on piano, that's Piet's son, Carlos Cortés on percussion and flamenco guitar, and Juan Sainz on drums. This is produced by Piet Verbiest for Contour VZW, recorded live by Pierre Dozin at the Gelezaal de Singel, Antwerp, Belgium, on December 14 and 15, 2023, mixed and mastered by Pierre Dozin. The recording is going to start out with a tune called Al Andaluz. There's also notation on the recording notes of what forms these are in flamenco music. So this is a boleros, and you'll instantly know that you're not in Kansas or New York anymore from the opening of this recording. Verbiest gets it started with a solo bass improvisation. I'll pick it up in the sample about 45 seconds in so that you can hear the transition to the main tune getting started with the bansurine and alto sax melody. Boleros is a 12-beat pattern usually, but this has more of a 6-beat feel and gets into a swinging section. Interesting AABA structure here. The A sections are 6 measures and the swinging B is 8 measures. Let's take a listen. Into the more swinging B section there. After the melody, Van Dyke gets an alto sax solo first that gets an exciting section of double time switch up. Things chill out a bit for a piano solo from Milan Verbiest with some good hand percussion from Cortés. I'm sure that you'd like to hear some of this bansurine instrument, so let's check out Muriel's solo a little bit later on in the tune into some percussion. There's a really neat, earthy tone to it, and those rhythmic change-ups are a lot of fun, too. The percussion there bring it back to another time through the melody with some final phrase repeats. Track 2, Nuevo Autorado. This is a tanguillos. Drums and percussion open this one up. Tanguillos are in 4 beats, but the polyrhythmic nature has a 6-beat kind of undercurrent that you can also count out. Let's hear the repeating 16-measure melody a little bit into the tune. Off on the first solo from there, followed by Van Dyke on alto. There's a little melody transition ending section to Vervest's bass solo. Let's hear some of his playing on this tune as well. He's really making it sing out with melodic ideas and works into some intense double stops and rhythmic figures for a climax into a final melody section with a percussion break for extra excitement. Track 3 is the title track, El Mar Empieza Aquí. This is an allegras. Milan Verbis starts it out on solo piano, joined by Mariusz Bansurine for a modal rubato start. Let's check the beginning of this out. The sunny melody is getting going there, and you can feel the allegras 12-beat pattern. And interestingly, once it gets going, you'll notice that it sounds like it's built around rhythm changes. Milan Verbis solos first on piano, Van Dyke follows on alto. So let's check out some of his alto sax playing just before they switch into double time later in the tune. from there, Muriel gets some trading with drums and percussion before everyone is back for a final melody section to wrap it up. Track 4 is Thad Jones's A Child is Born, here done as a solea, which is usually a slow 12-beat pattern with guitar built around the Phrygian mode. Verbus makes a solo bass opening for this one, getting joined by the percussion and guitar setting a steady rhythm. Be sure to check that opening out. I want to start a sample from where Van Dyke's sax comes in at about 2.5 minutes because many people will know this lovely Thad Jones melody, and I want you to hear this interesting reimagination of it. Yeah, very nice. And Muriel has a really neat solo from there, using that melody phrase idea with this modal idea as well. Let's just continue from there and hear some of it. Milan Verbus gets a flowing piano solo as well on this tune that continues over a final melody section from the woodwinds. Track 5 is La Filosofia del Jamón, and this is dedicated to Carmelo Muriel. This one has a 5-beat rhythm pattern. This one has a 5-beat rhythm propelled by a bass ostinato from Verbus. There's a rhythm section intro. Let's have a listen from where the woodwinds come in a little into the tune. Comes down there for a mysterious start for an alto solo from Van Dyke, starting out in the lower register. On this one, let's hear some of Milan Verbus' exciting piano solo later on in the tune. Now Verbist gets the hypnotic ostinato going again for Muriel's Bansuines solo that builds up with percussion, and the percussion and drums get to have some subtle but intense interaction over the ostinato. Let's check out a little bit of that too before we finish up on this tune. And it finishes up with a final melody section. It's the longest track on the recording at just about 13.5 minutes. Track 6 is called Asylum, dedicated to all refugees in the world. This starts out with a unison father and son interval ostinato figure over percussion for the introduction. The exotic modal melody starts about a half a minute in and sounds great on Muriel's Bansurne, doubled in spots by piano and bass. Let's hear it from the repeat of that first phrase into some more interesting sections about a minute into the tune. After a little interlude there, we hear both sections again. Muriel has a haunting Bansurne solo, and Milan has a piano solo with some interesting harmonic navigations. Drums and percussion have some soft texture time over the ostinato, disappearing and restarting into a final melody section. Track 7, Y allá ella está. Guess that means, and there she is. And this is dedicated to Griet van Steen. It's a Seguarias. Carlos Cortez starts this out on solo guitar, working it into a steady tempo and getting joined by percussion and Verbist's bass. Muriel's Bansurne gets a delicate melody, and this all takes a while to develop, so for a sample, I'll start about 1.5 minutes in, just before the Bansurne melody. continue on into an improvised solo. Van Dyck gets a soprano sax solo on this tune, so let's hear some of his soprano sound on this tune. Verbus gets a melodic and singing bass solo on this one as well, before a final melody section with both wind instruments joining in. And the recording finishes up with a tune called Bull, which is a boleros. This starts out with a modern modal jazz 6/8 feel to it. Milan Verbus plays some intense piano on the intro. The Mansurne and sax melody has interesting phrasing, and Verbust's bass lines underneath are forceful. Let's hear the tune get started. Van Dyck solos first on soprano on this tune, with the rhythmic flow constantly challenging with change-ups underneath, and Milan Verbus gets a piano solo next, skillfully navigating the rhythmic change-ups. Let's hear one more solo from him on this tune. And the winds are back for a final melody section, and then we hear the applause of the crowd, reminding us that this was a live recording, and one with very good sound quality.
You wouldn't have known it was a live recording from the audience.
So Piet Verbus shares his immersive experience into flamenco music through this satisfying melding with jazz. His original compositions cover a variety of traditional flamenco styles and rhythms, but also seamlessly flow into swinging sections in the songs. Thad Jones's A Child is Born also gets an inventive reimagination. The instrumentation has a unique charm with Muriel's earthy benserne and Van Dyck's alto and soprano sax leading the melodies and providing inspired solos. Carlos Cortez's guitar and percussion keep the flamenco spirit throughout, and Verbist gets the spotlight with engaging and melodic bass solos, and his son Milan impresses throughout with his piano playing. The spontaneity of this live performance is captured with great sonics on the recording.
The whole sound of this album was pretty surprising to me. Despite it being called Flamenco Jazz Summit, I only thought there was one track that solidly sounded like flamenco. The rest of it was mostly inspired by traditional jazz, though the entire sound of the album, the rhythm solos, and the bansurine made it sound like an unidentifiable category, really. So it's a jazz record, but a lot of it kind of goes into some new place. A Child is Born sounded straightforwardly flamenco-like for me, and yet it's a traditional song. With its hand claps, melodic patterns, and Y Alia Ela Esta has Spanish stylings. And then tracks like Asylum had a slow, trudging rhythm that made me think of like a desert caravan. Mm-hmm. And then La Filosofía de Harmon features solos that all start with the rhythm section coming to a stop and building from silence to something bright and exciting. So the approach was always surprising, let's say. The music is for the most part sunny, which is not a quality I generally associate with flamenco. I think of it more as passionate,
Right.
And this had passion to it, but it just seems so positive. And that sunny quality is certainly welcome here. I really loved the sound of this album with all the percussion and sounded great. Most of the tracks were pretty jazzy in rhythm, often with multiple rhythmic changes.
Yeah.
And there was excellent soloing on the album, but to me, this kind of came across more as a group effort with everybody like contributing to the sort of whole sound and building on what had gone before. I thought it was a really interesting album and a great sounding one, too.
Yeah.
And even more surprising because it was a live performance and they got such good sound out of it. It really comes across with some studio quality to the
Yeah, I thought it was
recording.
Like, live in studio or something. I saw it live in the notes, and I didn't get any hint of any extraneous noise throughout the recording, so I forgot until I got to the end, and I was like, wow, yeah, nice job. On to our next recording, a debut from German saxophonist Leonard Alkemper. It's called Awakening. It's on Broken Silence Records. It came out August 30th. Leonard Alkemper is a Cologne-based saxophonist and composer born in 1992. He became a permanent member of the Jugendjazz Orchestra, NRW, at age 15, with which he won the WDR Jazz Prize in 2013. At the same time, he began studying at the Folkwang University of the Arts in Essen. After graduating from high school, Leonard studied at the Hochschule für Musik und Tanz in Cologne and spent a semester at the Conservatorium van Amsterdam as part of the European Erasmus program. He occasionally fills in with the WDR Big Band, as do two of his bandmates here, and additionally we have one of our favorites, American pianist Billy Test, who has been a permanent member of the Cologne-based WDR Big Band since 2018. Leonard Alkemper on soprano and tenor sax with all original compositions. Billy Test on piano and Rhodes, Stefan Ray on bass, both acoustic and electric, Nicholas Walter on drums, produced by Leonard Alkemper, and executive producer Joachim Becker. The recording gets started with the title track, Awakening, and Billy Test gets the tune going with some descending figures, and Alkemper comes in on a 32-measure melody on soprano sax. He has a pleasing tone and fluid phrasing. There's a nice bass pulse to the rhythm, and Alkemper continues on improvising over the modal harmony changes. Let's hear the recording get going. Well, he builds a nice arc in his solo, building on previous ideas. Let's hear how he wraps it all up, going more towards the end of it. Billy Test starts his piano solo out placidly and has some snazzy little ornamental figures before becoming more animated with some great lines and a percussive finish. Don't miss that solo. The final sax melody has truncated phrases to finish up the tune. There's a fun airiness to this tune to get the recording underway. Track 2 is called Blossom. Some trickles from Test started out, and Alkemper is on tenor for this one with a very smooth tone. It gives the impression of a ballad with a 6-beat feel, but the melody has some rhythmic change-ups, and it really builds as it goes after the catchy opening riffs. Like the melody, Alkemper's improvised solo starts from a gentle place and builds up with energy from the rhythm section. He gets some intensity working in both the higher and lower registers. Let's check out some of his tenor energy. Test's piano solo has some delicate descending trickles to start out and works into some time-stretching phrases and then rhythmic chords. The final melody section builds energy quickly and then has an unwinding clock feel that is a classy touch before the final phrase. Track 3, Bottrop, which I guess is a city in west-central Germany. Billy Test starts this out with solo piano, getting into some surprising harmonic explorations before setting a tempo for Alkemper's tenor and Ray's bass to join in on the melody. When Walter's drums join in, there's a mix of delicate cymbals and hard-hitting accents. Test solos first, with a solo bubbling with ideas, and it's time to hear some of his playing, so let's join in midway on his solo. Alkemper comes back with a melody phrase into a more gutsy tenor solo on this one that he pushes right to the final melody section, which is a more forceful rendition of the opening melody and gets doubled up by Test's piano. Track 4 is called Down the Vortex, a change in atmosphere for this one. Alkemper's on tenor again, Test is on Rhodes, and Ray switches to electric bass. The melody is a 32-measure AABA construction with a 6-beat feel that has some fun skips in the rhythm. Let's check out the melody on this one. Test gets the first solo on Rhodes with some tasty bass fills from Ray and legato backing lines from Alkemper. There's a new composed section of lines that works into a building sax solo and ends with the new, more animated melody section we heard in the middle. Track 5 is Ginseng, something fun and funky for this one with a riffy sax idea to get things going. includes an electric bass idea going for the groove in this one, and Test has a very cool percussive Rhodes solo here that we should check out. Channels some R&B feel on this one with an intense solo over a great groove from Ray and Walter, who get to work it up over Test's chords before they get back to the riffy melody start. Track 6, Street Lights in Paris. Back to all acoustic here for a ballad. The 32-measure melody is catchy with repeating riffs in an AABA form. Alkemper shows off a full warm tone and his solo has an emotional intensity. Ray gets an acoustic bass solo with a big ringing tone and fine melodic sense, and Alkemper's back for a final A section of the melody with some final warm thoughts. Track 7, Rear Up. This is a cool tune, conjuring up a modal spiritual jazz atmosphere. The rubato start with drum fills introduces the rising sax riff that gets worked into some nice Latin beats from Walter once it gets going. And from there, Ray gets a bowed bass solo, and it's got a lot of neat ideas in it, so let's listen to a little bit more of his playing. Test has an exciting piano solo next, and Alkemper's sax solo matches the intensity from his opening statement on the tune. Track 8, Haboob, an Arabic word for an intense dust storm. Alkemper's back on soprano for this one. It starts out with an intro of bass ostinato. There's a 6/8 feel and a 36-measure sax melody that becomes sparser and stern as it progresses. Ray's up first for an acoustic bass solo with some bluesy touches and very precise articulation, and Test's piano solo has some hanging chords with harmonic tension before getting motion from smooth zippy lines and an explosive chord climax. This is a real highlight, so let's check some of this solo out. Yeah, some amazing piano playing from Billy Test. Al Kemper's soprano solo gets some snake-charming squeezes in it, a la David Liebman style, so let's check out a little bit of his playing on this tune as well. Up with the more stoic final part of the opening melody. Track 9 is Red Sky, a rubato and rippling solo piano opening from Billy Test. Ray joins in with ringing bass, creating a loping waltz feel. Walter adds cymbal textures to bring in Al Kemper on tenor with soft wispy lines that gradually thicken in tone over the growing beat to a quiet ending of just sax. It's unique, creating a kind of linear event of perhaps watching the sun rise. Track 10 is Shimmering Surface. Repeated bass notes in intervals get joined by rhythmic piano that comes to a pause and restarts for a soprano sax melody. It's soft, contemplative, and meditative with sudden modal harmony changes, sounding like it's in a 7/4 meter. Test and Al Kemper have enjoyable solos on this one. Track 11 is Spring, back to funky with electric bass and Rhodes here in an R&B kind of mood. Ray's bass is really popping and it has a unique 6-beat groove. The sax melody is in a 32 measure AABA form. Let's check out the tune. A section there, and then Ray is up for a bass solo. Definitely fretless here with some impressive agility that we should check out. Yeah, nice bass playing. Test has a Rhodes solo, and Alkemper's solo has some great harmonic tension building, and he lets the tones scream out a bit with intensity. Walter gets an impactful drum solo with dynamics before they get back to the melody. And the recording ends up with a little German-flavored dessert, Steigerlied, a folk song that originated with minors. Some colorful harmonization from Test, and Alkemper showing his lyrical side here. Let's hear a little bit of it get going. Gonna go around one more time. It's a short final tune at just 2 minutes and 23 seconds. An ambitious debut recording packed with an hour and 16 minutes of music. Alkemper shows impressive technique, a well-formed style, and a lot of versatility. His original compositions have a lot of variety, ranging from modern modal ideas, spiritual jazz hints, R&B grooves, and traditional jazz balladry. The rhythms, grooves, and time signatures have a lot of variety, and the moods change up with electric bass and Rhodes in some tunes. Alkemper has great tone on tenor and soprano, usually pretty, but he can get an edge when he needs to. His solos build in a mature style with connected ideas and fine phrasing. Billy Test shows why he's one of our favorite players yet again, whether accompanying or with dazzling solos, and Stefan Ray really impressed me with his bass versatility, great grooves, and fine solos on both plucked acoustic, bowed bass, and electric solos. And Walter is solid and versatile as well, with lots of different drum grooves and textures. It's a long recording, but definitely worth your listening time.
Yeah, first, it's a great recording. There's clarity on all the individuals in the band, and it's possible to zero in on any one player at any time. So I really appreciated that. I was really interested, you would imagine, because we were always talking about this pianist, I was interested in Billy Test's opening ideas for these tracks.
Yeah.
He's almost in Schoenberg territory with some of the harmonies he uses on track 3, Bottrop, in which he also takes a solo that's interesting for its harmonic approach. And he comes up with creative intros to many other tracks. He's the first musician we hear at the beginning of the album, too. But the album, of course, belongs to Leonhard Alkemper, who will build his solos dynamically as well as thematically. On several tracks, he starts with a quiet, breathy tone and appealingly builds to a full, warm tone. I liked some of his passing ideas in his solo on Red Sky, track 9, for example. And for the most part, the album is on the lighter, dreamy side of jazz. There's a lot of hope and sunshine in the playing, and there are tracks like Streetlight in Paris that capture the romantic nighttime mood of that city as well as the funkier groove on Spring. It's a long album with a lot of good playing on it. Allkemper and Test make a good duo, and I liked drummer Niklas Walter's hard-hitting style in the faster tracks.
All right, one more recording and we'll jump from Germany to Italy. With Music is the Answer. I agree with that sentiment. From Domenico Sanna, Italian pianist on the Fresh Sound New Talent label. This recording came out September 4th. Domenico Sanna was born in 1984 in Gaeta and began playing piano at age 6. He moved to Rome in 2003 and he began his studies of jazz piano at the University of Music. After a year, he was invited to the Blue Note in Milan with Fabio Mariani's group. He graduated in 2007. In the same year, he won the Best Pianist Award in the Jimmy Woody competition held in Soriano del Cimino, judged by George Cable's Bobby Durham, Benny Golson, and Jimmy Cobb, and Joey DeFrancesco. In the meantime, he worked around the Roman jazz scene. In 2008, he recorded with saxophonist Rick Margitza, and in 2009, he recorded Più Sole by Nicky Nicolai and Stefano Di Battista. And in 2010, he released his first record as a leader. About this recording, Domenico Sanna says, quote, "Music is the Answer is an ideal about the attempt to live by pursuing some important values that music itself teaches, such as knowing how to listen, collaborate, adapt, respect, and appreciate others' perspectives. Study, research, curiosity, and meditation are creative phases that offer us the opportunity to live more openly. After several years of collaboration with Amin and Greg, we finally recorded. I'm happy and honored to play with two such profound musicians."
Yeah, I just laughed because, boy, this is a very timely idea for an album.
Yeah, just what we all need. All right, on the recording, Domenico Sanna on piano and mostly original compositions. I'll point out the ones that aren't. And we've got some synthy sounds on here as well. Amin Salim on bass, Greg Hutchinson on drums, and a special guest on one track, alto sax Gabriel Marciano, Fabio Sasso on drums. Recorded at Extra Beat Studio in Rome in April of 2023. Sound engineer Clive Simpson, mixed by Enzo Soriani, and produced by Domenico Sanna. Executive producer Jordi Pujol. The recording is going to get underway with Ottobre, October. Almost there. This starts out with some synthy sounds that continue as Sanna comes in with soft rubato piano figures over drum fills. Things get into tempo with Salim's ostinato bass figures and building piano figures from Sanna with the synth sounds returning for atmosphere. Let's hear it from the bass ostinato a little bit into the tune. Hutchison's drumming catches your ear as the tune turns more sparse, and Sanna returns with more of a rhythmic push with chords and building lines to a faded ending. It's a very atmospheric start.
I want to say those some of that that electronic stuff. It sounds like the tape's being played backwards. I'm hearing a lot of that kind of
reverse sound. Yeah. Track 2 is HD, a rubato start with piano chords and bass over Hutchison's drum textures. It gradually gains motion over walking bass into a swing before Sanna is left solo, and it gains momentum with the others again. It's really hard to capture any of this in 1 minute of a sample, but I think from about a minute in we'll give you an idea of the free-flowing, spontaneous nature of what's going on here. Interesting chord voicings and a light touch from Sanna. Salim has a melodic bass solo on this one as well. Track 3, T for Art. That would be, of course, Art Tatum, and referring to his famous T for 2 as the subject here, which you'll pick up from Sanna's opening chords in this playful stop and start beginning. Let's hear it get going. Well, things get really swinging as Sanna's improvised ideas take off, so let's come back in and hear a little bit more of that later on. Salim keeps things chugging along as Hutchinson gets busy on the drums and Sanna lays low before returning with hints around the melody to a faded ending over a vamp. Tracks 4 and 5 are designed to be listened to one after the other without interruption. Track 4 being Mingus Overture and track 5 Mingus's Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. So let's listen to track 4. It's just about a minute long, and I'll let it segue into a little bit of Goodbye Pork Pie Hat. That sound there reminds me of a steel pan drum kind of tone almost. Well, let's hear some of the interesting contrast of Sana's piano ideas over the bass and drum groove from about midway through this tune. Track 6 is Possibility, and Salim opens this on bass, working into an ostinato with drum textures. It's kind of unique sounding. Let's hear it get started. And that hypnotic sequence is the basis for the tune. Let's hear some of the ideas that Sana comes up with to paint around it. Track 7, we get a standard. Jimmy Van Heusen's Darn That Dream was published in 1939, became a #1 hit from Benny Goodman's 1940 recording of it. Sana gives it a little rhythmic vamping intro into the melody that swings lightly along with brushwork from Hutchinson. Let's have a listen. building up the tension there with a little more rhythmic vamping before his improvisations. And he'll do that again into some darting lines. So let's listen to a little bit more further on in the tune. And later they'll use that rhythmic vamp to build up to a piano ending, quoting the tune intro melody. Track 8 is Music is the Answer, the title track, a synthy sound intro here, and then things breathe and swell between more driving sections with Salim's chugging bass lines. The recording ends up with track 9, Nocturne Gaetano. Gabriel Marciano joins in on alto sax here, and also Fabio Sasso is on drums. It starts with a synthy low string ensemble sound with soft piano into a rubato sax line. For a sample, I'll start a little into the tune where the drum beat starts and sax and piano get a unison melody line after a minute in. Let's hear some of Marciano's improvisations a little bit later on in the tune. and Sana follows with an improvised solo section. The drum beat ends, and the string sounds return to a soft sax ending. And that's it. It's a short recording at 36 minutes. Overall, it's enigmatic and atmospheric. Sana's style is rather minimalistic and suggestive of melodies rather than being explicit. His chord voicings are interesting, and people who like a more free jazz style will enjoy this. Salim and Hutchinson are skillful at this flowing approach with their distinctive personalities coming through, too. It was really hard to pick samples out of this recording, so I would suggest just listening to it from start to finish to get the full effect of what Sana is trying to put across here.
Yeah, I did like the grooves on this album, and I thought Domenico Sana's playing was appealing. He keeps these tracks short, but it's not for lack of ideas. He certainly keeps them coming. The rhythm he creates with Amin Salim and Greg Hutchinson are compelling on all tracks. There's a welcome openness and freshness in the approach. I have to say I was a bit puzzled by the use of electronics on some of the tracks. Why not just put out a straight piano trio recording? I don't know, it just kind of seemed odd to me. But the material is appealing enough to stand its ground. It's an enjoyable release, and I only wish it were longer. I'm looking forward to hearing more from this pianist.
Yeah, that's kind of why I picked it. I had seen his name on Italian jazz lists, but we haven't heard anything by him, so I thought it was a good opportunity to check out a new pianist. And he has a kind of an endearing, suggestive style. Like I said, it's kind of interesting, especially when you hear him work on something familiar like Darn That Dream. It was kind of interesting. Yeah, I'm filling in the blanks of the melody in my mind as he's sort of doing these interesting chord voicings moving around there. So I like to hear him do some more familiar and also new things on an album in the future as well. That wraps up episode 181 of Adult Music. And we've already got our picks for next week's episode, Mike. So why don't you tell us what's on the classical menu?
Yeah, we do. So for our earliest period, we've got 2 cello concertos, one by Carl Philipp Emanuel Bach, who we really love, and another by a composer unknown to me, Antonin Kraft, who was Bohemian and lived at about Carl Philipp and also Beethoven's time. So we'll get to hear his cello concerto too. We finally get to hear a Fauré Requiem on this podcast in the 100th anniversary of Fauré's death, so appropriately, I guess.
Right.
There's a new recording of that by Le Concert Spirituel, conducted by Hervé Niquet, and it's got some other compositions on it too. And then I've got an album of organ concertos, 2 of them, or one of them by a contemporary composer, Wayne O'Keefe, I guess his name is pronounced. I don't know. He's American, but if it's Spanish pronunciation, it's O'Keefe. And this includes the final concerto written by Christopher Rouse, which is his organ concerto. So I'm looking forward to hearing that too. And 2 other works on that are earlier than those. But that's classical. I think it's going to be a very entertaining week again. These look like 3 interesting recordings.
Yeah, sounds interesting. Over on the jazz program, I've got all new September recordings, starting out with a piano trio recording by pianist Greg Reitan. This is on the Sunnyside label. It's called The Bounding Line, and he's a pianist that I haven't heard before, and the inspiration for the album looks kind of interesting. So that'll be up first. Another pianist that we find kind of interesting, Micah Thomas. We heard him a few weeks back as a sideman, but this is his new release as a leader, Mountains, on Artwork Records, and he's going to be in a larger format of a septet. So I'm interested to see what the arranging will be like on that recording. And then finally, on the Positone label, a new one that just came out from trombonist Ryan Keberly called Bright Moments. And this is going to be an octet. And I've already checked that out, and it has some really great arranging with some of our favorite Positone cast of musicians. So we'll finish up with that for next week's program. And if you want to hear those recordings and get started listening to them as we do, they'll be on a playlist on Deezer up a few hours after this episode is published. You can also find a link to it from our Facebook page. As always, we want to thank Fast Signs of Staten Island for our glowing neon logo. Mike, any final words for our first stereo endeavor?
Yeah, well, whatever my previous words were, those are my last words.
Oh, okay.
I don't have anything.
Right.
I bet they were great, though, whatever those last words were. So,
All right, then we'll be back again next week for episode 182. So until then, keep listening, and we'll see you again next time.